Welcome in, everybody. It's Sean Gallagher with you. Make sure to follow me on Twitter at spgallagher2. And also check out the blog at spgallagher.com, Gallagher's Word. And this is another edition of the Gallagher's Word podcast. A lot happening during the week, and going to recap as much as I can for you. We'll talk about the NBA playoffs, now the NBA Finals, Spurs and Heat. Back at it again. Anybody excited about that? I mean, the Heat are the first team since the 80 Celtics to go to 4 straight NBA championships, but I think everybody was pretty much convinced that this Heat team, when it was put together with Bosh, Wade, and LeBron, that they should be doing stuff like this. But are people kind of getting tired of it? We'll talk about that. Also, Stanley Cup Final. New York Rangers are back in the Stanley Cup Finals for the first time since 1994. We'll touch on the New York Rangers and the Western Conference Final. It's going to Game 7. The Blackhawks had forced Game 7 back in Chicago Sunday night between the LA Kings. And speaking of Los Angeles, I guess we'll start with the big news that came out Thursday night. Steve Ballmer, the former Microsoft CEO, he had the winning bid for the Los Angeles Clippers, a team that was valued at $575 million by Forbes this season. His winning bid, of course, being $2 billion, so he paid over 3 times the amount of money that the Clippers were actually worth. And really, this is a good thing, I think, for the Los Angeles Clippers. I mean, number one, you knew you had to get the Sterling family out of there. I mean, you've already banned Donald Sterling from the game, and then you have the whole controversy of, is Donald Sterling going to accept this and just sell the team and be on his way, take his billions, or is he going to fight this? And there was kind of a tug-of-war going on with Donald Sterling. He didn't know what he was going to do, but then they rendered him to be mentally incompetent, maybe have Alzheimer's disease. So it looks like Steve Ballmer is going to be the man that will be the new owner of the Los Angeles Clippers. And when you look at the values of NBA teams, I mean, the New York Knicks are the most valuable team at $1.4 billion. And the city rival, the Clippers, the Lakers, $1.3 billion. And you knew that the Sterling family would take the highest bidder. And there were rumblings about $1.5 billion, but to get into $2 billion, which is incredible. And it makes you wonder, too, how much are the Los Angeles Lakers worth? They're $1.35 billion right now. Could they be worth $2.5 billion, $3 billion? It makes you wonder. And, of course, Steve Ballmer's going in on this alone. There's no full group like Magic Johnson had when he bought the Los Angeles Dodgers for, I think, was $2.1 billion. And there were, rumors that Oprah Winfrey was trying to put an ownership group together, but this is Steve Ballmer going at it alone. And, of course, Steve Ballmer's got $20 billion, but for him it's going to be a business investment. And also, this is not Steve Ballmer's first time in a go-around trying to get an NBA team. I mean, when the Sacramento Kings were in disarray, a lot of people thought that Ballmer would come in, move the team to Seattle. Of course, Seattle losing the Sonics, going to Oklahoma City, and there's really been a campaign to try to put a team back in Seattle over the past couple of years. And I don't even know if you can even move the Clippers. I mean, for Steve Ballmer, this is, I believe, a good investment. He got a Los Angeles team. Eventually, the lease is going to be up at the Staples Center. Maybe it's more persuasion where the Clippers can get their own arena. And there's even been rumblings that Ballmer could use it, too, in a way, to get the city to maybe even invest into an NFL football stadium, because there's been talk of maybe bringing the NFL back to Los Angeles, but that's further down the road. But I got to tell you, too, Steve Ballmer, really enthusiastic guy. Just listen. Pretty enthusiastic guy, I may say so myself. Steve Ballmer, that's a clip of him talking to some developers and other people with Microsoft. Really enthusiastic guy. I think that's why it's going to be a good thing for the Clippers. And, he's probably already being deemed a hero out in Los Angeles for buying the team. But then again, it just makes you think, going back to just how much teams are worth. Could the Lakers be worth something more in the line of $3 billion? What about some of these teams that hover around the $400 million mark? Because an average right now in the NBA is probably around $506 million. And that gets bumped up because of Chicago, Los Angeles, both Los Angeles teams now, and of course the New York Knicks. But despite all the bad things that have happened to the Los Angeles Clippers over the past few months, this really is one of the better times to be a Clippers fan and maybe even be an LA Clipper, because right now in the state of California, you are one of the top 2 teams out of the 4. And right now, you are the number 1 team when it comes to success in the city of Los Angeles. The Clippers can't say that every single year. So take advantage of it while you can. And you know what else, too? I hope that Steve Ballmer leads some chants on the court floor at the Staples Center, because listen to this.
Developers, 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 developers. Developers, 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 developers. Yes!
And I'll tell you, too, if you ever get a chance to go on to YouTube and watch any of Steve Ballmer's speeches with Microsoft, the guy sweats up a storm. I love it. Enthusiastic. Not afraid to get out there and sweat all over a dress shirt. And I guess sticking with the Clippers and Donald Sterling, you probably saw this. According to eScore, they said that Donald Sterling is the most hated man in America currently. 92% of people said that they hate him the most out of anybody on this list. And that says a lot, especially since you have people who have committed manslaughter, double homicide, people who are just complete waste of space in our society. I mean, Donald Sterling's a bad dude. We all know this. He's been openly racist. He's tried to keep certain minority groups from renting housing from him. And then, of course, he was finally exposed by this mistress who recorded him saying racist things that got him banned from the NBA. But like I said, there are murderers and there are people who are just complete waste of society on this list. Here are the people who are not as hated as Donald Sterling is. Finishing just behind Donald Sterling, Bernie Madoff, a guy who embezzled billions from clients in a Ponzi scheme. And then there's a tie for third. A tie! And they both involve murder in some different way. O.J. Simpson, a man who allegedly killed 2 people, which I think a lot of people feel like he did, even though he was acquitted of it. And, of course, he is in prison now because of an incident in Las Vegas with some of his memorabilia. The guy who's tied for third with him, Conrad Murray. Now, you might have to Google this name to know a little bit more about him, but he's Michael Jackson's former physician who was guilty of involuntary manslaughter following the 2011 death of the pop star. 5th place, Justin Bieber. Need I say more? Should be higher. Phil Spector allegedly killed somebody. There's been a lot of mistrials with that case. Number 7, Aaron Hernandez. Another guy who should be higher. A guy who has allegedly killed not 1, but now 3 people, because we just learned that he is being brought up on charges of allegedly killing 2 people in a drive-by in South Boston back in 2012 before training camp opened, all because the guys accidentally spilled a drink on Hernandez. Shows you just how great of a dude he is. Number 8, Michael Lohan, Lindsay Lohan's father. Not the only deadbeat dad on this list. Number 9, Elliot Spitzer, former New York governor, of course, hanging around with escorts. And then number 10, to wrap up the list, as I said, deadbeat dads, there's 2 of them on this list, John Goslin. John Goslin of John and K+8, you know, the old TLC show where the family from Pennsylvania with 8 kids, they got divorced, and he was seen as a deadbeat because he left her with all those kids. I mean, she should be on this list somewhere, too, because I don't like her either. But those are the people that are not as hated by America as Donald Sterling is. He is the most hated man in America, ladies and gentlemen. And, of course, sticking with basketball, the Miami Heat and San Antonio Spurs, they're meeting again in the NBA Finals, and it's a milestone, too, for the Miami Heat and the Big Three. The 4th straight year they have been to the NBA Finals. No team has done that since the 80s Celtics, so it's been a long time since we've seen that. Not even Jordan's Bulls made it to 4 straight NBA Finals, but they did win 6 championships in the 90s. You have to remember that. It's amazing when you look back at last year's NBA Final, especially since the Spurs had such a great opportunity to win it. You go back to Game 6, the Spurs have the lead, and then Ray Allen hits that 3, sending it to overtime, gives the Miami Heat new life, and they go on to win Game 6 and Game 7. They win the NBA Final, their 2nd straight. So the table is set. The San Antonio Spurs want revenge. They want to win the NBA championship, and the Miami Heat are going to look to make it 3 in a row. So we're kind of being promised what we were being told by the Miami Heat and LeBron James. Not 2, not 3, not 4, not 5. It's going to be not 2 if the Miami Heat win this one. And in a way, it's a bad thing for the NBA because we talked about this so much. People were discussing it. That when the Miami Heat decided to bring in Chris Bosh and LeBron James to play with Dwayne Wade, there was a worry about these super teams. And Miami, they are a super team. They have a lot of talent, and they've been the dominant team of the Eastern Conference. But then again, the Eastern Conference stunk this year. Other than them, the Pacers, later on with a little bit of the Raptors, Washington Wizards peaked at a good time. I mean, teams eventually started finding themselves on the better part of the 500 record than they did at the beginning. But there's no diversity inside the Eastern Conference. Western Conference, a little bit different. You know, you have the Oklahoma City Thunder. They're a team that's always in competition. Last year, the Memphis Grizzlies played the San Antonio Spurs in the West Final. And, of course, a down year for the Los Angeles Lakers. And then you have the Golden State Warriors, the Clippers. Those teams were competing. So the West was a little bit more open. But San Antonio proved to be the dominant team in 2014. So if the Miami Heat actually win another NBA championship to give them 3 in a row, and they've been in the NBA Final for the last 4 years, it's something that we knew could possibly happen, especially when these 3 joined up down in South Beach. Now, with free agency coming up for LeBron, we don't know where he's going to land. Of course, the conversation about Cleveland. But it's a situation where, yeah, we did know it could possibly happen. But is it a negative thing on the game of basketball? Now, of course, we haven't seen many super teams formed since Miami decided to do it. But it does leave you to question it, especially when we see the same matchup as we did last year, and we see the same team from the Eastern Conference that we've seen for the last 4. Moving quickly on to hockey, New York Rangers back in the Stanley Cup Final for the first time since that magical 1994 championship season. And you look at this Ranger team, they kind of fell in between in the Eastern Conference. And especially when they entered the playoffs, you have teams like the Penguins and the Bruins overshadowing you. And then they find themselves down 3-1 to the Pittsburgh Penguins in the second round. And it looked like everything was pretty much over for the New York Rangers following game number 4. And then you have the tragic event of Marty St. Louie's mother, France, passing away on May 8th. And suddenly things start to change for this team. And we've seen it in the past where personal tragedy is something that can inspire a team. Get behind that teammate that has lost somebody close to them and play in honor of that person. Because when Game 5 came around between the Penguins, they embarrassed the Penguins at home 5-1, and then they go back to the Garden on Mother's Day, and Marty St. Louie, he gets the first goal in that game that they went on to win 3-1, and then they finish it off back in Pittsburgh in Game 7, 2-1, to go play the Montreal Canadiens. And, of course, they just beat Montreal in the Eastern Conference Final in 6 games. Now, Marty St. Louie, I have to say this, he is a guy that I have enjoyed watch play during his career, especially since it's been mostly down in Tampa Bay. It was fun to watch him win the Stanley Cup in 2004. And he kind of reminds me of Mark Recchi. Not the tallest guy, not the biggest guy out there on the ice, but he makes up for it. He's got a lot of speed, a lot of grit, and you saw it in the playoffs, especially after the tragic event of his mother's passing. Now, of course, St. Louis left Tampa Bay at the trade deadline. You think he was going to be a veteran guy that could help the Rangers, but it seemed more like he was going to just blend in with the team when he came there, especially with their playoff run. But since then, he has 4 goals and 3 assists during the playoffs. And I'm not going to shoo Henrik Lundqvist in any way. He had an incredible playoff run up until now. You know, a 2.03 goals against average, a .928 save percentage through these first 3 rounds going into the final. There's a lot to take away from what the Rangers have done, and it's been a team effort. But you have to acknowledge that Marty St. Louie's mother's passing did have some kind of influence on this team and inspired them. Get behind that guy. And it's a bad example to use, but if we remember the 2012 Notre Dame football team, and it leaves a bitter taste in people's mouths because we found out that Manti Te'o's girlfriend, Lene Kakua, number 1, wasn't dead, and number 2, wasn't even real, that he'd been catfished. But it inspired him and the Irish football team, especially that game against Michigan. One of the best games in his career. He picks off Denard Robinson twice, and it's one of the wins that led to an undefeated season before they got demolished by Alabama. So it does have an effect. I mean, we can at least say this. We do know that Marty St. Louie has a mother, and that his mother did pass away of a heart attack. And speaking of triumphant stories, people overcoming adversity, Dominic Moore, who could really be described as an NHL journeyman, he's played with the Penguins, since I do this from Pittsburgh, but he lost his wife back in January of 2013 to liver cancer. Terrible, tragic event. She was only 32 years old, and he sat out the abbreviated 2012-2013 season. And Dominic Moore has been with a lot of teams in his career. He's been with 9 altogether. His first team was the New York Rangers, and he's back with a second tenure with the team after sitting out that season after his wife's death. And he comes out in Game 6 and gets the game-winning goal. And if you haven't seen the E60 story that was done on Dominic Moore, I would highly recommend checking it out. Because it's hard to dislike a guy like Dominic Moore. He's an NHL journeyman. He has played with several teams, and he has come up big in past deciding games, especially Game 7, when Tampa Bay faced the Pittsburgh Penguins in 2011, and Dominic Moore got the winner for the Lightning. So another nice story to pass along there. Western Conference tonight, you got the Chicago Blackhawks taking on the Los Angeles Kings to determine who's going to play out of the West. Whoever comes out of this conference has to be the perennial favorite for the Stanley Cup Final. You got last year's champion taking on the 2012 champion. And it's been great to see the Blackhawks down 3-1. They looked dead in the water, but they were resilient. And one guy they really have to thank is the play of alternate captain Patrick Kane. How many times has Patrick Kane been reliable for the Chicago Blackhawks when they've needed him? He got the goal in game number 6, that was the game winner, to get them back to Chicago Sunday night for Game 7. And I know some people won't like me using this as a comparison, but Patrick Kane is kind of doing what people might have expected Sidney Crosby to do in these situations. And of course, Crosby did not have a great playoff series against either the New York Rangers and the Columbus Blue Jackets when the Penguins were in it. But Patrick Kane is a guy who has been clutch for the Blackhawks over the years. He got the game-winning goal in the 2010 Stanley Cup Final, even though most of us didn't even see it go in. He got the goal in the Western Conference Final that got them into the final last year. And I know some people, they don't like Patrick Kane, but you have to like him based on how he plays. He's there when you need him. He can be clutch. Los Angeles Kings, they're a team that always seems to fly under the radar, but they're sneaky scary. They're an all-together team. They don't get fluttered when they get down, and they can score on you. So whether it's Los Angeles or Chicago going to the final, one of these two teams is definitely going to be a favorite. And speaking of Stanley Cup Final, and this is what we'll wrap things up on today, the NHL has to love the markets that will be in the Stanley Cup Final. And regardless of what happens tonight in Chicago with the Kings and Blackhawks, you're going to have either the New York and LA market or the New York and Chicago market representing in the Stanley Cup Final. And that is great for the National Hockey League. You have an opportunity to put the Stanley Cup Final on display with 3 of the biggest markets in America. Of course, it'll be narrowed down to 2. And the one thing I will say, even though they are big markets, TV ratings aren't that great, especially when you look at a city like New York. Los Angeles Kings, of course, 4th lowest when it comes to ratings. The Rangers saw a really nice jump in their rating, an average of 1.24. But of the 3 hockey teams, it is the highest because right now the New York Islanders average 0.41 and the New Jersey Devils 0.16. And some may be curious to know why teams that are that successful have low TV ratings. Well, you got to look at it this way. Los Angeles and New York, big markets. A lot of people live in there. A lot of other stuff happening. You look at a city like Pittsburgh, you're either worried about the Penguins in the playoffs, and based on how the Pirates are doing, you're counting down the days until the Steelers head to St. Vincent for training camp. Because think about Los Angeles. You got other stuff going on. You got the Donald Sterling situation with the Clippers. Usually the Los Angeles Lakers are the scene stealers. You got Hollywood. people buying houses they can't afford. New York City, you got Wall Street, hustle and bustle, city that doesn't sleep. You got the Knicks, you got the Yankees. God forbid you're a fan of the Mets. A lot of other things going on in those cities that don't surround the game of hockey. Now, Rangers a little bit better than the Los Angeles Kings when it comes to viewership and even a fan base. But that's just a fact. You see smaller hockey markets that have a better appeal. More people seem to be paying attention. But a city like Pittsburgh that has only 300,000 plus living inside the city and 2 million surrounding the metro area, you can kind of understand when you look at a city like New York of 8 million why not everybody is focused on the New York Rangers. But still, a big catch for the National Hockey League. No matter how it turns out with Los Angeles or Chicago, you're going to have some big markets for the Stanley Cup Final. That's going to do it for me today. This was a little bit longer. This has been the Gallagher's Word podcast. Make sure to follow me on Twitter at SPGallagher2 and also the Gallagher's Word blog at spgallagher.com. Take us out, Steve Ballmer.